There was a pretty big win for the federal Conservatives in an Ontario by-election on Monday. Former Sun columnist Jamil Javani won quite easily, capturing 57.4% of the vote. That is up from the 46.4% the Tories took when Aaron O'Toole ran in the Durham riding during the 2021 election. Now, to chat about this in more detail is current Sun columnist Brian Lilley, who joins us once again from Toronto. Brian, explain why the results of the Durham by-election matter to all parties.
Yeah, my normal take on by-elections is by-election results don't matter until they do. And what I mean is, did you get something that you didn't expect? Now, in terms of who won this by-election, Jamil Javani and the Conservatives, they were always going to win it. But it's when you look at the numbers, the results, that you say, oh, wow, this is something. 57.4% for Jamil Javani and the Conservatives. As you said, up from O'Toole. Okay, why was he up? Because O'Toole, 46.4%, that's a really good outcome. Well, because not only did the Liberals collapse, but the NDP collapsed. So the Liberals only got 22.5% of the vote. That's a 35-point gap between the Liberals and the Conservatives. 35 points, Hal. That's unheard of. It's unreal. And then the NDP, which not that long ago used to challenge for second in this riding, well, they collapsed to about 10.5% of the vote. Normally, when the NDP collapses in Ontario, there are places like British Columbia where you get what's called orange-blue switchers federally. Doesn't happen a lot in Ontario. So normally, suburban Toronto riding, if the NDP vote collapses, it goes to the Liberals. It didn't. The disaffected NDP voters either didn't show up or went to the Conservatives. And based on the outcome for the other two, I'm guessing that some from both parties went to the Conservatives. This has to be something that is worrying for the Trudeau Liberals, because it kind of proves that the polling that we've been seeing for some time is right. And there was one poll from Abacus Data that had the Conservatives up by 17 points, I believe. But then David Coletto, the CEO, posted a graphic of what it's like if he took Quebec out of the equation, where the Liberals still do quite well. And in the rest of Canada, the Conservatives went to 46%. The Liberals dropped down to 23, and the NDP was at 22. Well, they were at about 23 last night, just a bit below that, half a point. The NDP was nowhere. Bad news for Jagmeet Singh, bad news for Justin Trudeau.
Let's see if the Tories can continue that momentum into next year when we have our federal election here. Brian, we received more insight into the Winnipeg lab story, but once again, the Trudeau government, assisted by the NDP, appeared to be stopping us from finding out more. What happened?
There was an attempt by the Access to Information and Ethics Committee, led by Conservative MP Michael Chong. He's a committee member, not the chair, but he put forward a motion saying that he wanted the committee to investigate. This is the job of parliamentary committees, to look into issues, to study things. That's what they're there for. And the Liberals, led by Iqra Khalid, said, oh, this isn't urgent and there's nothing to see here. We don't need to look into this more. Well, we know from the documents and what has been released that they were blocked not because of national security concerns, but because they were going to be embarrassing for the government. The government completely failed on this front. And if you remember, they refused committee orders to produce papers. Committees can tell the government, we want to see these papers, and they're supposed to produce them. They ignored 4 votes in the House on this issue. They were found in contempt by the Speaker and told to release the documents, and instead took the Speaker to court and then called an election that made all of this moot. So they've been fighting this for years, and now we've got some of the documents, people looking at it going, okay, well, we need to find out a little bit more, and they're told, oh, no, nothing to see here, just whistle past the graveyard.
Now, Brian, some of the recent information released is that one of the 2 fired scientists, Dr. Q, was doing some work to benefit China. That included working with the Wuhan Institute of Virology, transferring various viruses, including Ebola. Now, is there a connection to COVID-19 and this particular scientist?
Well, that is a question that a lot of people are asking now. And they were asking it before, and the Trudeau government would say, don't get into conspiracy theories. Well, now we know that she was working with the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which is the lab that the coronavirus, they were studying novel bat coronaviruses at this lab. And there has long been a theory, it's not a conspiracy theory, but it hasn't been proven any more than COVID came out of the out of the wet market, they still don't know. But they were studying viruses like this at the lab, and there is a thought that the lab may have leaked it. So what we do know is that Dr. Key was working with the woman known as the bat doctor, the bat professor, Dr. Shi, who is central to the entire COVID and coronavirus story. Key was working with her on novel corona bat viruses. Was this part of what eventually led up to a leak out of the lab and into the community, and then from there, the entire world? Quite possibly. That's something that perhaps the committee could be looking into. That's something that maybe the government has information on, and maybe that's why they don't want it getting out there. I'm sure that they will dismiss all of this as conspiracy theory or misinformation or disinformation. When you hear Justin Trudeau use those words, just know that it's something that he doesn't want you to talk about because it's normally something that doesn't make him look good.
A reception on Saturday night between two G7 leaders was canceled after an angry mob riot, pro-Palestinian protesters blocked the entrances. Now, this was supposed to be an event with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Italian PM Meloni celebrating ties between our two nations. So who's to blame here?
Squarely the Toronto police. I know a lot of people have said, oh, Trudeau's to blame or the RCMP's to blame. Let me explain how it works. And this would be the same whether it was Toronto, Ottawa off Parliament Hill, if the PM came to Lethbridge for a big event. The RCMP would have a coordinating role with the local police service. But the security for something like this outside of the building is up to local police. And so this reception was supposed to take place at the Art Gallery of Ontario. It's only a few blocks from me. It's the middle of downtown Toronto. They've had big events before. They can handle them. The protesters had control of the entrances right up to the doors, Hal. There were no barricades, no stanchions, no, okay, protest over here. This is an entranceway. Don't block the entranceway. Police lost control of the entire event from the beginning. And when we're talking about the exterior, and even to a degree the interior, that is on the local police of jurisdiction. So in this case, the Toronto police. The RCMP is there to protect the Prime Minister and to provide assistance to the security detail for the Italian Prime Minister. They're not there for crowd control on the outside. So this is wholly on the Toronto police, who have been doing a horrible job dealing with these angry mobs of, I actually call them pro-Hamas protesters because I've been to so many of the marches and I've seen what they've got to say. I've seen what their signs say. The police chief and leadership have been completely ineffective. And that's why in the Toronto Sun today, we were calling for the resignation of Toronto Police Chief Myron Demkiw. We'll see if that happens. We'll keep the pressure up. But it was an embarrassment for Canada around the world. This story was picked up obviously in Italy, but also in the Middle East, in Britain, in India, in the US. You can't have two G7 leaders meeting and then it gets canceled because of an angry mob of protesters.
So if police can't appear to deal with hate rallies in some of the streets of our largest cities, how are they supposed to police the internet through the recently introduced Online Harms Act?
This is a major question. We're adding in some ways, we're just strengthening sentences or making things doubly illegal. But in other ways, we are adding in new offenses and new ways to handle this. You can't handle these events on the street, whether it's in Vancouver, in Thornhill. I haven't heard of one in Calgary for a while, but in Toronto, there's a big one in Montreal last night. There's going to be another one tonight. You can't handle this. How are you going to police the internet? It's mind-boggling. And it's not as if Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who is making his case anytime he's in public for his new Online Harms Act, it's not like he's making the case that police need to actually do something here. He's mostly silent as these anti-Semitic acts happen, including intimidating protests at synagogues.
Now, the Trudeau government is portraying the Online Harms Act as protecting children, but critics and other people are calling it an attack on free speech. So, Brian, which is it?
It's both. And it's strange because these are two different bills that are attached as one. And so there's been some commentary saying, you know what, we can probably pass all of this stuff at protecting kids, the so-called revenge portions dealing with intimate images. That's one area. And you're probably going to get broad agreement on dealing with that. So let's pass that separately. And then you've got all the Online Harms Act side of things, with the policing of the internet. Let's deal with that separately and let's make sure we get it right. I'm not sure that they're going to do that because they're trying to wrap this all up in, well, we're protecting children. Why don't you want to protect children? That sort of thing, that sort of rhetoric that I never like it when politicians of any stripes do that. There was one point Vic Taves, when he was Harper's justice minister, used language like that and was widely ridiculed. So I feel the Liberals should face the same treatment on that. The Online Harms Act portion, you've got things like life sentencing, life up to life in jail for advocating genocide. I'm not sure that that would stand a court challenge. I think it's there for show. It's part of why I don't think that portion of it is a serious bill. There is a portion that deals with getting a peace bond against someone, and you could be under house arrest if they fear that you may commit a hate crime. Now, that's already in the criminal code for fear of committing terrorism. So, there's very odd bits about this that, need serious study. I'm not sure the government's up for serious study, but they should split the bill.
News broke that Luca Magnotta is at the same medium security prison as Paul Bernardo, Brian. Now, Magnotta, as you may remember, stabbed and dismembered university student June Lin in Montreal back in May of 2012. He was later found guilty of first-degree murder 2 years later. How is it that two killers like Magnotta and Bernardo are in the same medium security prison?
Medium security prison with a hockey rink, so you can have a pickup game in the winter, a tennis court, you can have nice one-on-one tennis in the summer, a nice gym, great weight room that apparently I talked to an MP who toured the place just recently, and he said it's a better weight room than 95% of Canadians would have access to. How is this? Because of Bill C-83, a bill that was passed back in the first term of the Trudeau government. It passed in 2019, and it says in the bill that if someone's going to be held in prison, Correctional Services Canada needs to hold them in the least restrictive environment. And so after that passed, didn't take long for the inmates to notice. They started putting in requests for this. Magnotta was authorized for transfer before Bernardo in August of 2022. Bernardo was denied one transfer to a prison that he wanted, but was permitted to go to this. I spoke to MP Frank Caputo. He represents Kamloops, Thompson, Caribou in British Columbia. He tells me that the place has the feel of a university campus. He said it's still jail. Wow. You've still got the fences and the barbed wire on the outside, but once you're in, he says it feels like you're walking around campus. It's really casual. You can't tell the workers and the inmates from the guards sometimes.
Let's talk a bit about Brian Mulroney, our former Prime Minister who died recently at the age of 84. Brian, many would say he was a controversial figure. He helped launch the North American Free Trade Agreement, but at the same time, he was also the Prime Minister that introduced the GST, which at the time was 7%. I believe then Harper came in and lowered it down to 6% and then to 5%.
Yeah, so look, Mulroney has long been a controversial figure, but any politician that's going to take big risks, and Mulroney took big risks, is going to create controversy. But when you look at his record, it's a stellar record that he and his family should be proud of, that Canadians should be thankful for. The free trade agreement was not the disaster that critics claimed. The GST, as much as we hate it, it replaced a hidden tax that used to be manipulated by governments. Now it's out front. I actually love that he put it out front, said, no, you've got to have it there. Why? Because no one's ever raised the GST, Hal. Harper took it down, as you said, and no one wants to raise it because they know it angers Canadians. So, when it was hidden, they used to move it up and down. So that GST allowed Chrétien and Martin to balance the budget later on. That was always the goal. Mulroney couldn't get there. He got spending under control after Pierre Trudeau took it to astronomical heights. He got it under control. He got the GST in, and Chrétien and Martin took the victory lap for balancing the budget, which they could only do because of that tax. Standing up to apartheid, dealing with acid rain, admired on the world stage. These are things that you can't say about our current leader right now. He was Prime Minister at a time when Canada mattered, and he mattered in part because of who the leader was at the top.
Political reporter and Sun columnist Brian Lilley, thanks so much for joining us today from Toronto.
Thanks for having me.